Yesterday, I was leaving church and a man walked up to me as I was heading out to my car, and he said, Barb, you're the person I was hoping to ask this question. What he wanted to know was he had seen so much happening online, and his question was whether or not racism existed as much as he saw it online. For some of you, you're hearing that and you're like, ugh, you want to just turn off the video right now because how could he ask that question? But I also suspect that there are others of you who've been wondering the same thing. So this video is titled Racism 101. And I know this title could be off-putting for some, but I realized that everything has become so complex, and in the face of so much complexity about race and culture, that it could be helpful for us to all start again at step one. And if you don't want to start again at step one, I get it, that's okay. You do not have to watch. There is some other fun video out there for you. But for those of you who are so lost in the swirl of everything that's going on, or maybe you've got so many feelings that you can't quite get a grasp, let's step back to the very beginning. And so I want you to think about the topic of racism and culture in your life like a garden. Let's start there. This is a framework that I hope could be helpful for some of you. Whenever we have a garden, the first thing that we start with is the soil. And so the soil becomes where you grew up at, your community. It depends. Some of our communities were very homogeneous. Everybody looked the same, believed the same, acted the same. Some of us grew up in communities that had a low level of racial diversity. Some of us grew up in communities that were highly racially diverse. That's the soil. And then a garden isn't a garden without seeds. And a seed is the potential for something. And there are 4 different kinds of seeds that we want to talk about when it comes to this concept of racism and prejudice. The first seed is the seed of what you heard growing up, the words that you heard. This is the seed of the conversations that you heard around the table, the seed of how people talked about people who were differently than you, who lived differently or looked differently than you, that you heard your grandparents or your parents. These words helped you identify who you could trust, who you could ignore, who you could partner with, who you could mistreat, who you could love. Those words were seeds that were planted within you. Did you grow up in an environment where you were taught about different races and cultures on a regular basis? It was more than just a pop-up here and there, but did your community not only have representation, but also celebration of different races and cultures? Those 2 things, representation and celebration. If you think about your formative educational years, those years from kindergarten through 12th grade, it's a long time. How much did you learn about different races and cultures? And did your educators in between those learning experiences continue to affirm what you heard? Or did their personal comments and beliefs undercut what you learned? So that's the seed of learning. The third seed is your lived experiences now. What is it that you are currently experiencing when it comes to race and culture? Do you live in an area where you never see anyone different than you? Do you work in an area where you never see anyone different than you? Or do you live and work in an area where maybe you're the only person, and so that lived experience? Or maybe do you live in a different or in a racially mixed environment, and where you're not exactly sure what's acceptable and what's unacceptable, and how do we talk about things? Your neighborhoods, like where is it that you live and learn? The last seed is the seed of fear. The seed of fear, that's a seed that's planted because whenever there is someone who looks different than us, We all have one of two responses. On the lowest level, we fear being misunderstood or mistreated on the lowest level. But on the highest levels, that seed of fear is the fear of being either judged or that fear of being destroyed. And so that seed of fear. So we've got 4 seeds that we're starting off with. First, we've got the seed of words. What were some of the seeds of words planted within you about who you could love, who you could trust, who you could mistreat, who you could ignore? The second seed is the seed of your learning experiences. What is it that you learned in the formalized educational system? What is it you learned from your community? Where different races and cultures represented and celebrated. And then the third seed is the seed of your lived experiences right now. How is it that you're living, and how are races and cultures, what role do they play in your lived experience? And then the fourth seed is the seed of fear. It's when someone is different than you, what fears do you have? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But these are the 4 seeds of prejudice. And I know as soon as I introduce that word, some of you are like, oh, but here's the thing. We all have prejudice. Like we've got to settle that up. We all have prejudice. 1 Samuel 16, I think it's verse 7. That's the classic verse. That man looks at the outside, but God looks at the heart. We look at the outsides of each other and we form opinions. What is prejudice? It's a preformed negative opinion. As human beings, that's just our nature, that we're going to look at people who look differently than us, and we're going to come up with reasons why that's not good for us. There are prejudices that we all have outside of race and culture. That's just who we are. Like for me, I'm prejudiced against raw chicken. I hate raw chicken. I love cooked chicken, but raw chicken, like there's something about the salmonella on the outside, and I have this feeling that if I don't touch raw meat. If you talk to my husband in all the years that we've been married, my family actually laughs at me because I cut up raw meat with a fork and a knife. I don't touch raw meat. It grosses me out. I'm prejudiced against it. And do I have a good reason why? Not really. I'm also prejudiced against capris and leggings. Yes, I am prejudiced against capris and leggings. It is a negative opinion that I have about them. Capris, one day I was a kid and I walked by a mirror, or I was an adult woman and I walked by a mirror and I saw myself in some capris. And it reminded me of my childhood experience where I used to be really short and then I grew really fast and my mom couldn't quite keep up with my pants. And so there were times back in the day we used to call pants that were too short floods. And so I had to wear floods pretty regularly because I was growing so fast. And so when I saw capris, I became prejudiced against them because it reminded me of the flood days. So I'm prejudiced against capris. And I'm prejudiced against leggings because I do not like seeing my body in a piece of clothing that is sucked up tight against everything I do not find lovely about myself. We all have prejudices. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do we completely understand how those seeds of prejudice, how they affect our lives today? So let's go back to our gardening analogy. If we grow up and those seeds of prejudice are unchallenged, then we're going to have some negative things that happen as a result. Those seeds are going to grow into weeds. If we don't challenge the seeds that have grown within us, they're going to grow up into weeds. And what are weeds? Weeds are ugly. Weeds, they don't produce good fruit. Weeds, they take over and they choke the life out of anything good that could happen. That's what happens when we have these seeds of prejudice in our lives and they grow up unchecked and unchallenged. But if we have those seeds of prejudice and we know about them and we acknowledge them and even accept them, then we have the opportunity for them to actually grow into roses. When you look at roses, what I love about a rose is that it still has a thorn. And so in this analogy of looking at race like a garden in our lives, that those thorns represent the pain of our learning experiences. Because talking about race and prejudice, it's painful. Living through the experiences are painful. But the fruit of it, if we live through it, the fruit of it is the beautiful rose. That's the thing that we cherish and we treasure. We don't take pictures of thorns. We cherish the roses. I believe that it's possible for us to have a landscape filled with weeds, that we could close ourselves off to conversation about race and prejudice, and we could just push back against it because it's uncomfortable. If we do that, we will only grow weeds. And for my life, I think I have a lot of roses, but I know that I still have some weeds. There are still prejudices in my heart that come from the seeds of what I experienced, that come from the seeds of fear. I still have them. We've got to acknowledge those seeds of prejudice, and we've got to own up to them. Now, this was part 1 of Racism 101. I originally had done both parts in one video, but I decided that for your time's sake that we would break this dialogue up into 2 separate discussions to give us some time to process through things. And so the takeaway for you is to spend some time thinking about you and what some of the seeds are in your life. In the second video, Racism 101 Part 2, we're going to talk about the bridge from prejudice to racism. We're going to talk about some of the things that are undermining some of the anger and the pain and the resentment that results in what we're seeing posted on social media today. We're going to talk about how some of our well-meaning posts end up not so well received. And we're also going to talk about some things that we can do starting in each one of our lives. These videos aren't intended to be a magic fix. Instead, these videos are done with the hope that if you care about creating a world where people are loved and valued for who they are, that you're going to choose to let it begin with you. So again, you're welcome to leave any comments. You're welcome to challenge anything that you have, anything that I've had to say. You can go ahead and do that in the comment section. I'd love to hear from you. But a special warning to those of you who are trolls, those of you who love to go around social media and start mess, your comments are going to be deleted. And we're not going to put up with you trying to get involved negatively with an important dialogue we all need to have with each other. So thanks for joining me, everyone. Bye-bye.